So, Shaf, how do we notate the black notes? We've looked at how we notate the white notes and where they go, but how do we notate the black notes, those pesky sharps and those pesky flats?
Well, Dr. Johnson, uh, we notate them with accidentals most of the time. Let's say most of the time, accidentals are pointing to the black notes. That's not always the case. We'll find some exceptions to that later. But for this first week, I want to talk about what the accidentals are, just so that when you see them, you know the name and you know a little bit about what they do. So here are the accidentals. We have the sharp and the flat, which we talked about in naming the keys on the piano. But if you have used a sharp and you want to bring the note back to the original note, let's say you use C sharp. Now, if you later in that same measure you want to go back to C natural, you need a natural sign, and what this does is it cancels out any of the accidentals before it.
And it takes it back to its natural state. So we refer to those white notes on the piano as the natural notes.
Correct. So if you're in a key that has an F sharp in the key, for instance, then the F natural would be changing you away from the diatonic scale. And then you would need a sharp to go back to the diatonic note. But generally speaking, you can just remember that the natural brings it back to just the letter, and the sharp or the flat takes it up or down, respectively. We should also briefly mention double sharps and double flats. Double flats are easy to recognize because they look like a double flat, but a double sharp doesn't actually look like a double sharp. And thank goodness for those of us who handwrite music, because sharps are time-consuming and cramp-inducing to write. So I know every time I'm writing a test and I have to write a bunch of sharps for a key signature, it really irritates me. So I'm always happy to do a double sharp because it's a simple little X.
It's an X, yes. It is not two sharps next to each other. That is incorrect. It is always an X represents the double sharp.
And there are theoretical triple sharps and triple flats, which look this way. You basically do a double sharp and you add a regular sharp to it.
I would also like to just talk a little bit about the placement of the accidentals in the staff. We've talked about the accidentals coming before the note head or to the left of the note head in the written music. But we also want to make sure that those accidentals are centered squarely on the line or the space that those notes occupy. So it should not be written as a superscript or a subscript to the note head itself. It should be directly in line with the note head.
And the gap in the accidental rests on the space or on the line. So for instance, if you, let's zoom in a little bit on a sharp. This sharp is pointing to a line because you can see the line crossing through the middle of the tic-tac-toe board. This flat is also on a line because you can see the line crossing through the open part of the flat. If you don't see a line passing through those two gaps that we just talked about, then that tells you that it's a space. And there are times when this is really helpful.
Well, if we have two notes that are very close together that are being played at the same time, one note is on a line, the next note is on the space directly above it, one of those notes is sharp, the other is not. It's very important that the sharp go on the correct line or space so that we know which note is to be sharped.
For instance, here you have a B and a C with a sharp next to it. At a glance, it might be difficult to know whether that sharp is indicating the B or the C. But if you look at the fact that that sharp is on a line, then you can see that this is referring to the C sharp.
And if we move the sharp to be in front of the B, this is what it would look like.
Correct. Although B sharp and C played together
Maybe that's a bad example.
is not something composers would normally do. I think it's a good example. It just isn't one that you're ever going to find. I think it works.
Okay.
I'm tempted to ask for questions at this point, but I'm going to
Are there any
refrain.
questions?